in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. We're going to make a start now, so I hope you are sitting comfortably. So first of all, welcome. Pleased that you could join us today. We're going to start by making introductions as always. So I am Karen Lovell and I am the Knowledge Manager here at HR Solutions, and I'm going to be your lead presenter today. And I am also joined by my colleague Asim Ardin. She's in the background, so she's going to be monitoring the message panel in your control panel. So if you did have any technical problems, she's going to be on hand to try and help. Hopefully there won't be any, of course, but she is there just in case. And equally, if you did have any questions as we go, feel free to drop them in that control panel to her as well. She'll collate them and I'll try and get back to you before the end of the day by email, if not before the end of the week at the latest. So as always, we will be recording. So if there is any bits you wanted to pop back to and scribble down, then don't worry, we'll be making it available online shortly afterwards. All right then, so that's the introductions and bits and bobs out of the way. Just got some aims then to talk through with you. So hopefully you feel that we've met these at the end. So we're going to look at a number of key things that are going to be changing in 2018 and affecting HR. And so stands to reason that my aims reflect those. Hopefully at the end you'll have a bit more of an understanding about the requirements of gender pay. It's hot in the news at the moment, so hopefully you'll feel that you understand a little bit more about what's going on there. And if you haven't already been inundated with information about GDPR, then I'm going to be giving you an overview. Hopefully some of you at least have been on my GDPR webinars, so you will know that I could talk till I'm blue in the face about this topic. If you don't know about GDPR, this is just going to be an overview. And if you did want to find out a little bit more, as I said, as with all our webinars, they're there for you to watch again if you feel so inclined. Next then, we're going to spend a little bit of time considering what the impact of these abolished tribunal fees might be on us going forwards. I'm going to talk to you as well about the updates that we've had, some key cases that have come in at the end of last year and how they're going to affect sleep-in shifts. Really important for a lot of people. We're also going to have a look at what the statutory pay increases are going to be for the next tax year. So this is your opportunity to take note of those. And we're going to be having a bit of an overview on the changes that will be affecting auto-enrolment. And then last but not least, we're going to look at what the root problem is that it surrounds the gig economy. Again, actually, another hot topic that's in the news an awful lot at the moment. So I'm going to just identify what that is and let you know about the government's plans to try and address it. So that's what we're going to look at today. So we'll kickstart them with gender pay. So this topic, I mean, it comes at an oddly appropriate time, really, considering that 2018 is termed the Year of the Woman, and it marks, of course, then the 100-year anniversary of women first ever achieving the right to vote. I mean, where does this come from? Well, I think many people really believe that this supposed gap in pay it could be the result of a bit of a hangover, really, from historical differences in culture and attitude. But nonetheless, you know, it is still very evident that there is a gap, and regardless of those reasons, you know, this is still a very high profile, very present issue that needs addressing. There's a number of suggested reasons as to why this could have come about. You know, there generally seems to be fewer women working in certainly more highly paid professions, areas of organisations such as science and technology and engineering and maths and things like that. it's been suggested that there's some unsupportive and rigid corporate culture. There's a lack of well-paid part-time or flexible work, you know, and it does seem from that women remain less likely to progress to senior levels in an organisation, and perhaps, you know, it's because they're a bit constrained by their choices of jobs available, and so, you know, there could be this unconscious bias that happens, you know, with higher level positions if we are being quite rigid really with how we perceive higher level roles to be. So, in a nutshell, gender pay gap looks at what the difference is between the average pay men and women receive. And I thought it would be important to just identify the subtle but distinct difference between the gender pay gap and equal pay. So equal pay is a topic that we are a little bit more familiar with and used to talking about. Equal pay is about the difference in pay between men and women who carry out the same job or a similar job with equal value. Okay, so it's jobs of equal value and what a woman would get paid and what a man would get paid in that job, whereas the gender pay gap looks at the overall average difference between men and women in an organisation. Okay, and you know, it is considered that there may be a number of reasons for this, and certainly it would be the case that when we do these calculations, the specific ones that there are might help us to indicate where the problems lie. Now, in some cases, it might be that it demonstrates that there is unlawful inequality going on, but it's not always necessarily the case. So this bit, we're going to have a look at the aspects that make up gender pay as an overview. So if you are an organisation that has 250 or more staff, then this applies to you. If that doesn't apply to you, you can breathe a sigh of relief, but nonetheless still have a bit of an idea of, you know, what's going on in the news and who it's affecting. So it's probably going to affect an awful lot of businesses and organisations actually. And as I said, if you do have 250 or more staff, and that is at the 5th of April, I might add, so you've got to have 250 or more staff as of the 5th of April, then you are obligated now to publish 6 statutory calculations. And as I said, this would look to demonstrate any differences, and they might point to various issues which are not necessarily discriminatory, but nonetheless need to be addressed. Now, these calculations are something that would need to be worked out annually. Okay, so if an organisation anticipates that on the 5th of April each year it will have 250 staff or more, then it will need to be conducting these calculations. And crucially, actually, they will need to be publicising those calculations in time for this date too. So it is going to require a little bit of forecasting for any employers who just sit on the cusp of that 250 mark. Okay, now when they are publishing their calculations, then they will have to make them available both on their own company website in an accessible place where any member of the public would easily be able to find it and suss it out, but they must also make it available on the company, the government's dedicated web page too. Okay, and so because it is something that is supposed to be very publicly visible, you know, this is why we're seeing some big named companies hit on news headlines already. You know, they're a little bit ahead of the game. I don't know if they're trying to, you know, coordinate when they come out to try and defer attention from any specific individual organisation. But, you know, we're seeing Asda, we're seeing Sainsbury's and Tesco hitting the headlines too, the BBC too, even, haven't we? You know, they are publicising these calculations. They're there in plain view, and they are, fair enough, alarming and attracting attention, as is, I'm sure, the point. So it means that we have some key dates that we can add to our diary then for 2018 in respect of the gender pay gap. So the final deadline for completing the calculations is the 4th of April 2018. And the reason for that is they must have been published by the 5th of April 2018. Okay, so some public organisations have got an earlier deadline, but the final deadline for everyone is the 4th of April, with a view that they're publicly available as of the 5th of April. So I think we'll probably be seeing a little bit more hype in a few months' time. So moving on then to our next topic today, GDPR. So it is a big piece of law that has come from the EU. As I said before, it's something I could probably witter on to you about for an awful long time, but I'm really not looking to bore anyone too much. It can be a very dry topic, but I do try and make it a bit more interesting and engaging, because after all, it does affect us all, really. But as employers, what we need to understand about it is that we've got this new bit of law, okay? It's going to be replacing the Data Protection Act completely. And the reason for that is it's been deemed that we really need to modernise the law to reflect the digital age that we live in. Data handling is just completely changed from when the internet was made available to the public, and our Data Protection Act actually sits at a similar time to when that happened. And there's so many ways in which data is just guzzled up all the time now. So this law is really to address this new age that we live in. And it is going to apply to personal data that is processed either in the EU or about a person who resides in the EU. Now, what that means is that actually there is a really huge scope for this piece of law, because it could impact on countries far outside the EU. Australia, America, they're places where we have quite a lot of cloud storage systems, and they are all going to have to be compliant too. If they're holding any data about people who are in the EU, it's just going to be so far-reaching. So it is really something that's being quite prominent. Now, one of the key aspects of it is that, right from the get-go, if you just wipe the slate clean of everything that you know about data protection, this regulation says that you must have at least one of the 6 lawful bases for processing data before you can even have it in your organisation. So that's quite fundamental. It also then specifies that you must be keeping records of processing. Now, that's very different from keeping records of what data you have. This is about keeping records of a data process from start to finish. And I'm not talking about anything particularly fancy, when I say a data process. To use a HR example, if you think about when you have a new starter join your organisation, it's quite common that we used to, certainly anyway, sit down with them and give them a new starter form, on a bit of paper, and ask them to complete, their address and their bank details and their reference contact information, and let us know who their next of kin is and all that malarkey. Well, a data process might be that, okay? So sitting the person down, this form that you give them, how that form then travels from that individual to a HR person, and who then puts it in a system, and how it's then logged and stored and, used by other people in the organisation. That's a data process. And so we're going to need to have to keep records of that processing. its life cycle and journey through our business, from collection to storage and deletion. Next up, and this is where we really start to see the emphasis on accountability, which is one of the key reasons that the GDPR has been brought about. If we have any serious breaches to our data processes that results, in a significant loss or might significantly infringe or jeopardize the rights of a data subject, then that breach has got to be reported within 72 hours of finding out about it. 72 hours, so it's really tight turnaround. It's got to be reported to, in our case, or at least if all of your key business decisions happen in the UK, then your supervisory authority is the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. So I think the fact that they're saying we need to know about any just potential serious breaches within 72 hours so that they can then decide whether or not it's something that they need to document themselves and need to tell us how to take action on, then, I think that's just a really poignant requirement that shows how hot on it they want us to be. And throughout everything we do, we have got to make sure that those processes have got privacy by both default and design at their very core. Okay, so before I mentioned that piece of paper, just a really quick example is the fact that that piece of paper, well, it's portable for a start, so it could get lost, couldn't it? On its way from being filled in to someone's desk where it might sit in an in tray for a day or two before then being used and discarded. That's floating around somewhere, and so perhaps by its nature, that process of collecting a new starter's data is not very risk averse, so we would need to be able to demonstrate, if we were audited, that we've gone back to the drawing board in many things that we do and rejigged how we process things. Another key change that will particularly affect people working in HR is subject access requests. So this is, for HR professionals anyway, the usual touch point for data law, and we're quite used to getting a request in for various aspects of someone's personnel file. At the moment, we're also used to, if we want to say that we want, a £10 fee for administering that request, and that we may respond to that request within a period of 40 days. But going forwards, we will not be able to do that anymore. Okay, so the fees have gone. A subject access request is free for somebody to make, and it must be completed within 1 month. But that is the absolute latest, okay? And in fact, the regulation does say very clearly that it's got to be completed without undue delay. So it's really important that, because if we have a disgruntled subject access request who's likely to make a complaint to the ICO, okay, and the ICO were to contact you about, your practices, you would want to be able to demonstrate that you tried to comply with that request as soon as you reasonably could have done, and not left it till the last minute just because you had other things to do, I'm afraid. So another indicator that there's going to be a real culture shift really brought about by the GDPR. And lastly then, really just reiterates this concept of privacy by default and design, but data security as well is just going to be really fundamental. In fact, the regulation does use the word state of the art through it on a couple of occasions. So, it's not messing around by any means. It really is saying to us that, we've got to have poured all reasonable resources into making sure our processes are private and secure, by default and by design. So, from a digital perspective, that might be things like getting your laptops and computers and things encrypted. It might include getting dual factor authentication just to doubly protect your passwords and access rights and so on and so forth. Okay. So I think this could really shift the scope of HR massively, because many of us are all, you know, scratching our heads and rethinking how, as HR professionals, we're actually collecting and processing HR data, you know, and are our processes fit for purpose, and are they secure as well? So ever more making good friends with our IT departments. Now, the overriding message from GDPR really is that less is more. So if I can impress nothing else on you, and you've not really started getting to grips with GDPR yet, less is more. If you just keep that soundbite in your head and try and live to it, you'll be on the right track, okay? There are 6 key principles in the GDPR, and 3 of them have got the words limitation or minimization in them, you know. So 50% of the whole content of the GDPR is about restricting what you've got. So, you know, if you can chuck it away, as long as you do so safely and securely, of course. And I thought I might as well chuck this in because it's another common question still. Brexit. Is it my get out route? Do I only have to worry about this and fly under the radar for the next 12 or so months? Well, I'm really sorry, bursting bubbles here, but the answer is no, this is not your get out route. I'm really sorry. You know, yes, and not only is it the case that this is going to come into effect before we have left the EU, you know, which in itself means we're going to have to comply for at least that period of time. Our UK Parliament has also drafted up the Data Protection Bill. Right, so you might have heard about this bill. It has been deliberately written so that includes all of the requirements, and not only that, but all of the same enforcements and penalties of the GDPR. So there is no getting away from it. I think really the whole intention behind it was to make sure that we are whitelisted as a country to try and minimise any impact on trade, but that's a whole different side of it. But you know, it can only help us to continue to do that with member states. So no, the fact that we have Brexit at our doorstep is not going to be our get out clause, I'm afraid, and it has been further confirmed by the ICO too. So we've got to knuckle down, we've got to deal with it. Which brings us back to our diaries again. So if you did want to get this penciled in, the enforcement date is the 25th of May 2018. Okay, and I say the enforcement date because actually this has been around since 2016. Shock horror. But it's from the 25th of May that we can start feeling the wrath of anyone that wants to start using the teeth of the regulation, so to speak. Okay. So, a bit of a different tone, but tribunals then, and thinking about what's changed recently. So if you cast your minds back to the summer of 2017, all that time ago, the Supreme Court took the massive decision to rule that the fees that were required to access tribunals were unlawful and prevented access to the justice system. And it was even said as well that the fees could be indirectly discriminatory against women. So, wow, massive U-turn. And 2018, of course, then is going to be the first complete calendar year without these fees. Okay, so since they were abolished, 2018 will be the first calendar year. And it is really worth us pausing to think about how this could affect us. If you remember, if you were aware at the time, but when the fees were previously introduced, the number of claims that used to be received by the tribunals fell, as you can imagine, but they fell massively. They went from 100% to under a quarter of what they used to be previously. Less than a quarter because of the fees. I mean, that's huge. You know, so if we just try and fathom that for a moment, and then think about the fact that those fees which had that massive impact have now been totally scrapped, what's going to happen? I mean, I think it stands to reason that many of us think that the claims are, of course, going to go back up, but you know, by how much and how steeply, we don't know. We're yet to see. But you know, if they rise again as quickly as they fell, it's going to be a massive impact. And what's that impact going to look like then? Well, I would suggest that it's going to prompt employers who, well, certainly employers who might have been a little bit more prone to being bold with their risk taking, to be that more cautious again moving forwards. And you know, maybe that is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, I am absolutely all for the promoting of justice and enabling access to justice. You know, in many ways this decision was fantastic, but it does mean, you know, and maybe this reveals the cynic that I've become, but it does mean that for those members of staff that are out there, I'm sure many of you have encountered them, who are easily disgruntled or who threaten their employer with spurious claims, you know, in an attempt just to cause disruption or to be as difficult as possible, or even maybe, you know, to try and force a payout through a settlement agreement, you know, they might not be inhibited anymore as they were in the last few years, to try and bring about that claim or at least threaten it, which will be really sad. But what it perhaps brings is an opportunity then for employers to think, let's get more savvy. Let's be a little bit more clued up on what employees and workers can and cannot claim, you know, so that we are better able then to recognise a genuine potential claim that needs our due care and attention from someone who might just be blowing nothing more than technically harmless hot air. Okay, so yeah, might still be quite time consuming, but you can, you know, go to bed at night knowing it's not going to go anywhere too serious. So hopefully it will prompt employers to be a little bit more savvy with their rights as well as their workers' rights. So totally different again then, sleep-ins. So for those of you who might not necessarily be affected by this, it's still really interesting topic. So I'm going to use the care industry particularly as an example here. At HRS, we do have a lot of carers, care organisations, sorry, that are our clients, and this is just a huge issue for them. It can be really upsetting because for the want of delivering the best possible service to all of their service users, they're just stretched to the nth degree, as I'm sure we're all aware from, you know, the news and things. And this issue actually, you know, is casting serious worries about how we're going to continue to be able to afford to do it. So I'm going to look at a couple of key cases, and the key issue really that surrounds sleep-ins pivots around this notion of a flat rate. Okay, so most of us are quite used to the concept of, you know, the minimum wage, and that working time attracts the minimum wage. Now, it's often, or it's, you know, historically been the case that a sleep-in shift where someone is free to go to sleep is been considered not necessarily working time, and so we can pay a flat rate for that that's agreed, which could be less than national minimum wage, of course. But this development that we're seeing, these cases that are coming through, are all pointing to the fact that perhaps that flat rate is unlawful. And although our law has not actually changed, okay, it still has not actually changed yet to say that flat rates are unlawful. All the cases going through tribunal where a carer is challenging underpayment, we are consistently getting this message that a flat rate is not going to cut it. Okay, so it does point to the fact that we should expect a flat rate to be deemed unlawful if we're dragged through a tribunal, and even that the law may change to reflect it. Okay, so we've had two cases at the back end of last year, the first one being this, the Mencap v Tomlinson Blake. Okay, just as a quick overview, this person, they were a carer. They were required to do sleep-in shifts, and when they were doing these sleep-in shifts, you know, there were a number of boxes ticked, so to speak, that point to a flat rate being okay, such as the fact that this person actually had her own room, you know, so she had her own section where she could shut a door and be in her own private space. However, she was not allowed to leave, okay, and she was simply required to keep a listening ear out, okay, so she wasn't expected to be doing duties for the entire shift. She just had to keep an ear out. You know, if she was awoken by a startling noise, she had to get up and use her expertise to deal with the situation and look after that service user that was in the accommodation with her. All right. So this is really, really common setup in care particularly. Now, what the tribunal found when they were reviewing the case was the fact that Mencap were actually obliged to have somebody in that circumstance on the premises under the Health and Social Care Act. And not only that, but they were also required to have somebody there under their obligations to their local council. Okay, so what this has reiterated is that because Mencap had a legal obligation, okay, and even if they had a regulatory obligation as well, they had this obligation that as an organisation they had to adhere to, and so in order to fulfil that legal requirement they had to have a member of staff present, and so there was no choice, okay, there, and that person was therefore entitled to be receiving at least the national minimum wage for her time there, even though she could have been asleep from start to finish. And this is why it's potentially going to be massive for care, because all those sleep-in shifts that have previously been paid at a relatively low flat rate are now going to be tripling or more. Okay, and that is where the problems come from. Not from not wanting to pay staff what their due entitlement is, you know. In fact, that's never been what employers I speak to, you know, are wanting to do, or they don't think they don't deserve it, but it's that the funding is just not there. So, you know, this case reiterated the fact that if there's a legal obligation, minimum wage ought to be paid. It also focused on the learning from the fact that because she was not allowed to leave, okay, she was not free to disappear and go and get fish and chips, you know, it's a test we refer to sometimes when giving advice. She wasn't free to leave and get her chips and come back. You know, she had to be there the whole time, and you know, she was needed quite significantly because you know, if something had gone wrong, there was a high level of expertise, you know, that were needed there to put right if anything went wrong with that service user. Now, the next case that we have is slightly a different tack, but again, still pointed to the requirement for minimum wage, and you'll see why it's quite different here. So, focus care, we're in tribunal, and it's a similar situation. So, the claimant, Roberts, he was also you know, going to these sleep-in shifts and was free to sleep from start to finish throughout that shift, and he was paid a flat rate too. Okay, but the crucial significant difference to the last case here was that actually in his contract, nowhere did it state a flat rate would be paid in any eventuality. It only ever talked about an hourly rate that this person would receive. Okay, so it didn't actually rule that the flat rate was unlawful, but what it did rule was the fact that he had his contract breached, really, by having been paid this flat rate and not being paid as high as what the national minimum wage would have remunerated him at. So this is another important lesson that we see time and time again, particularly if you do just wheel out template contracts over and over. And of course, we all use them because we don't want to leave anything crucial out, do we? But it's just another critical reminder, because I bet Focus Care were absolutely kicking themselves when they realised that nowhere in that document did it say that we would pay you a flat rate, because it hinged on that. There were other learning points from this case as well, but this is the particular one with regards to the rate of pay. So just make sure, and it applies to all things that we do, and not just, these rates of pay, but make sure that your contracts that you are issuing to somebody really do reflect what you actually do. I think problems quite often come up when you've perhaps solicited a template contract from somewhere. A few years have gone by and what you actually do now differs quite a bit from what happened when you had that contract drawn up. So, if you think, yeah, maybe that's me, have a little look. Go back to the drawing board when you get a new starter and just check you've got everything you need. Perhaps neatly then, from the issue of rates of pay, going to update you then on what the statutory rates are for 2018. Okay, so if you did want to just pause during this section to have a look at the info I'm putting up, then you can watch it again, skip to this bit. We're about 39-40 minutes in now, and you can just freeze frame and jot them down. So minimum wage then, we are seeing it creep up ever more towards the £8 mark, aren't we? So I'll take the top one as an example. Went bored to death reading it all out. National minimum wage then for those aged 25 and above, and please everyone remember that even though some genius decided to call it the national living wage rate, when we also have the living wage, which is completely different, the national living wage rate is a national minimum wage. Okay, it is statutory minimum for anyone aged 25 and above. Presently, that sits at £7.50, and it's going up on the 1st of April to £7.83. Okay, so yeah, national living wage, it is a national minimum wage bracket. The living wage is different. That one is the one that's a concept about what we think we should be paying people because of the cost of living. Okay, but it's not a statutory requirement. This one is. And then other statutory payments then, so lower earnings limit, and if you're thinking, what's that? It's something you probably do use a lot actually, though it might be your payroll team. That's what you would consider, for example, when you're working out if anyone's entitled to statutory sick pay. You'd need to check that they earn at least the lower amount. So presently that is £113 a week, and then from the 6th of April, okay, not the 1st, but the 6th of April, that's going up to £116. SSP is breached that £90 mark. It's going from £89.35 presently to £92.05. And then the other statutory rates that we might be concerned with in HR, for example, the family friendly ones that are all down the side there in the left hand column, are increasing from £140.98 to £145.18. So quite a chunk that's being increased there compared to the increases that we normally see each year. So then that obviously lends itself to a couple more dates to our diary. So if you just want to put a reminder, if you've got anyone, of course, that sits in those pay brackets or on or around them, the changes for minimum wage are increasing from the 1st of April and the other statutory rates from the 6th of April. Other dates then that you might want to just peg in your diary, for those people whose birthdays might be coming up, that might be a birthday that pushed them into the next bracket up, as you saw on the chart for national minimum wage. Get them in your calendars too, because of course when it's their birthday, their rates will increase effective from that day too. So we're on our penultimate topic, auto-enrolment. Hopefully, those of you that are required to have got your auto-enrolment staging done and sorted. So equally as that was phased in, there's also going to be a staggered approach to increases in the minimum contributions that should be afforded in any auto-enrolment pensions. Okay, so it is supposed to be a gradual increase, and we're going to see them over the next couple of years. So for those staff who have opted in, or at least not opted out anyway, presently they are getting a total contribution from you of 2% of their qualifying earnings, okay, that must be paid into a scheme. And presently that's split 50-50. From the 6th of April, so 6th of April, all kinds of things are happening on the 6th of April. It's going to increase to 5% of the total minimum contributions, and that is split to 3. So 2% from your employer and 3% from your members of staff of their qualifying earnings. And then again, same time next year, 2019, 6th of April, is increasing further, and it's increasing to a total minimum of 8%, split 3-5, 3% from the employer and 5% from the member of staff. So if you are an employer and currently engaged with a qualifying automatic enrolment pension scheme, then I would strongly advise you to contact them and anyone else associated with providing aspects of that scheme to ensure that arrangements have been made to meet these increases, okay, from the effective dates, because people don't always do what they're supposed to do they? So it's worth you being on the ball and just having a quick call to check that out. You know, failure to meet the effective dates might render, well, sorry, they will, there's no doubt about it, failure to meet the effective dates will render that pension scheme unsuitable for auto-enrolment pensions, okay? So you need to make sure yours is savvy and hot on it. Any changes to a scheme do usually require an employer to go into consultation with staff, but if the terms of the scheme you've got already accommodate the increases, or if the change needs to be enforced so that the scheme just stays compliant, and that's all in place, then you don't need to do any formal consultation. Okay. So last but not least then, the gig economy. So another news headline issue. We're quite used to seeing, I think, Uber and Deliveroo as well. I think they're the key culprits, aren't they, for having the gig economy attached to their name and certainly falling foul of it anyway. I mean, if you are unfamiliar with the gig economy, it's, you know, in short, about any work that might be considered quite casual or flexible in some way. And the crux of the problems that surround gig economy really surround employment status and the associated rights of that employment status that an individual is entitled to. Okay. employment status. There are 3 core categories of employment status that matter, okay? And those are employee, worker, and self-employed. That's it. I mean, we quite often hear phrases in a workplace, don't we, like bank or casual or 0 hour or self-employed or subcontractor, you know, and they're all fine, obviously, to use. They're fine, you know, they're using job titles, aren't they, and all sorts of things, and just general conversation. And if we know what we mean, you know, what kind of relationship that points to, then that's fine. But when we're thinking about the actual legalities, okay, these are the 3 that matter. Is the individual an employee, a worker, or are they self-employed? And to establish that, it is important for us to refer to whatever the contractual agreement actually says, okay? But the overall critical thing that a tribunal is always going to look for, you know, if you should get that far, hopefully not, but is what actually happens in practice, okay? So I'm not saying the contract is not important, you know, what's written down in black and white really should be there to define any of the grey areas, you know, of a relationship. But they're going to be concerned about what actually happens in practice on a day-to-day basis. And if the practices point to a different employment status, then that's what will be found, you know, and any associated rights or entitlements as a result, you know, could be incorporated into an award if we get it wrong. So we need to make sure that we are correctly identifying who we've got working for us and what they should be entitled to, really. And indeed, the government have said that they plan to increase awareness surrounding this. Now, what those plans are like literally going to entail and how they're going to physically manifest themselves, I have got no idea. It'll be interesting to see, won't it? I'm being very cynical today, but they have set out what they intend to do, which is a start, isn't it? So they have said that they just want to increase general awareness of rights. You know, good, yeah. And perhaps in the same vein, they said they want to equip people with the ability to understand what they should, or equally as important, should not expect from their employers. Okay, so, you know, I joke, but this is great because actually, if we are a bit more savvy, and I know sometimes we get to a bit of a I know my rights culture, but if we actually know our rights rather than just profess to and, you know, help to keep each other on the straight and narrow, then great, you know, that would be great. So how they're saying they're thinking of going about achieving this then, they say they're going to monitor the gig economy. Not sure how, as I say, but they have said that the sort of things they'll focus on are both the number of jobs that seem to be captured by this gig economy and also the quality of those jobs, which I think is really good because essentially it means that we're thinking about how people in this industry end up getting treated, you know, seemingly flying under the radar at the moment, and it's not on, is it really? And one of the key ways they're going to try and do this then is actually involving HMRC in the enforcement of annual leave and SSP. So workers are entitled to annual leave and SSP as employees are also entitled to annual leave and SSP. Okay, and I think this is where you know, some of these companies have been going wrong. I think they think that because workers are often referred to as casual, you know, it's non-committal, you know, after you work, you come in, you do it, that's it, job's a good one. You know, there is no more of a relationship than that, and that's what people think. But it's not actually the case. They are entitled to accrue annual leave based on what they've worked, and SSP in kind. And then they're also looking to provide the right to demand a pay slip. Now, you might be thinking, well, people have the right to a pay slip already, but actually, and I have done this because this is the sort of person I am, but I suppose it's how we get into the sort of position I've ended up in, I've gone back and looked at the Employment Rights Act, and it does actually specifically say that an employee has the right to a pay slip, not a worker. And it is very specific, you know, about employees and workers, you know, and how it's worded. So at the moment, would you believe, workers do not have a right to a pay slip. So if this right comes into effect, that will be a really significant change to the Employment Rights Act. And of course, you can see that it would enable somebody to check that they have been paid what they ought to have been paid. Great. And this one might be quite a game changer then as well. They're thinking about, and they're in discussion with the Low Pay Commission to consider getting a minimum wage and of course an increased minimum wage specifically for 0-hour contracts. So we've seen them for, you know, in respect of apprenticeships, although that is still connected to age, but all the other bans are based on age. And, you know, again, then this could be a real game changer if we have a new wage band introduced for 0-hour contracts. Really gonna blow some people out of the water, I think. But you can see why they're doing it. They are, I imagine, hoping that it will mean that people don't resort to dishing out the 0-hour contract if actually it's not really what's needed. You know, so many times I speak to people these days who have engaged someone on a 0-hour contract, and then when I actually ask what they tend to do, you know, they're on 40 hours a week, week in, week out, you know, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it just, you know, because there is this uncertainty around what a worker or, you know, an employee and where a 0-hour contract falls into either of those, you know, there's just so much blur. It does mean that rights get confused. And so I suppose, again, it's just about making sure that we're putting people on a contract that they should be on. You know, and that's not to say I'm not an advocate of a 0-hour contract, because I am. I think they get good bad press, but they just need to be used in the correct circumstances. And if used correctly, they're great for both people, employer and employee. So big changes potentially afoot. Gender pay, we've got GDPR potentially reshaping how we do all of our processes internally. We've got to watch out for employees who might be hot on our tails trying to put in their spurious grievances, you know, but you know, we've got to pay even more due attention to the ones that might have a legitimate claim in there. Sleep-ins, pretty much situation normal, but I'm afraid it's just more of the same bad news that we're expecting national minimum wage to be a requirement for sleep-in shift. And of course the government initiative is out as well. If you're in the care industry, you'll probably know all about it. And potentially these significant changes from the gig economy too, which could impact on other organisations that use 0-hour contracts too. So yeah, that in summary is bringing me to the end of our webinar today. If I've piqued your interest anywhere and you'd like to have a bit more of an in-depth chat rather than just the one-off question that you've not been able to pop through on the control panel, then we do offer free 30-minute consultations. We've got really lovely people here. Yeah, why not pick up the phone and see if you can book in one? Be nice to hear from you. But if you do have any questions for me that I might be able to answer for you on what we've talked about today, please do just pop them through on the message system now. Once the webinar's ended, might not be able to collect them, so you'd have to come to me directly. So if you just want to take a moment to do that, that'd be fab, and I'll try and come back to you. But in any case, these are our contact details. And if you do feel the need to ask a question, it would be great if I could have a little bit of feedback too, because I do always want to make sure that I'm pitching these in a way that you find interesting and, you know, giving you the sort of level of detail that you want and need. So thank you. Thanks for joining this webinar. Look forward to catching you again next time if you're signed up to any of our upcoming webinars. And in the meantime, take good care and good luck. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.